Welcome to today's webinar, Managing a Successful Analytics Implementation. I'm Liz Herrera. I'm the Director of Advanced Analytics at LPA, and I'm joined today by Amy Gursky, Director of Client Strategy with Cause and Effect. Amy from Cause and Effect, they help clients solve different questions using data, which is a lot like what we do at LPA. So at LPA, we've been in business since 2001. We have over 500 clients across a variety of industries, education, healthcare, hospitality, insurance, finance, manufacturing, government, etc. And you'll see on the side that we have three very well-known partners, in addition to Cause and Effect, who we work with. What LPA does, we assist our clients with implementing and training on our partners' technology solutions, and we also provide consultative service to our clients on everything from analytics strategy, data science and AI, business intelligence, data management, and governance, as well as financial planning analytics and performance management. So with that, we're going to jump into what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to start off talking about the imperative behind doing digital transformations and why it's important to talk about today. Then we're going to talk about some challenges that folks often face when they are doing an analytics implementation. We'll talk about some ways to tackle that, including an analytics strategy, as well as how to manage change, which is really key, managing the people and process portion of some of these changes. Then we're going to wrap up and take questions, and as always, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat window. We'll address them after the webinar is done. All right, so the first piece here that we want to talk about is digital transformation. And really the question is, why now? Why is this important? Why do we want to talk about this right now? And we thought that it's important to address this because of what we're seeing in the field. Obviously with recent changes, there's an increased interest that we're seeing in digital transformation and moving businesses up the analytics maturity curve to get to some of those more value-added outcomes, frankly, to stay competitive and relevant in today's marketplace, which is especially challenging. And what we've seen up until now is that a lot of businesses live kind of in the left phase of the maturity curve. So the operational cost reduction piece. And many have moved over to the BI data warehousing space, so they think about modernization, how to consolidate data so that it can be used by analysts, and that's great. But there's more of a need more recently to move up to more of those self-service capabilities, some of the new business models where you might want to use some AI or data science in a way that's really transformative to the business. And that kind of coincides with this proliferation of new data that's out there. And even in today's world, there's even more data that you can incorporate information on, but we're not just reliant anymore on historical data. We do have these new sources of data that are highly relevant today. So this combination of readiness to move up the curve and then having this new data available is really driving people to explore digital transformation.
So Liz, I have to jump in. I have clients all the time that are, like you said, on the left side of this. What I really struggle with is, how can we help clients realize that value of moving through that curve, and what are some of the things that they are going to face that you've seen regularly happen, and how can we address them?
Absolutely.
It's a desire to want to change, right? Like everybody wants to move to the right, but why can't we do it?
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? That so far, we talked to a lot of clients, and there's been interest, right? So, I talked about some of these newer things like data science and AI, self-service. That's been around for a while, and people just haven't taken the leap. I think there's been some hesitance to understand if they're really going to get value out of that, and they've also faced some specific challenges that have impeded them from making those changes. And that's a great setup. So that's actually what I'm going to talk about next.
Oh, great.
Yeah, some of the specific challenges. And it also ties to your piece, right? So I'm going to talk a little bit about some kind of high-level challenges, and then we'll move into the people part, because that's actually one of the key reasons that folks, I think, have a hard time changing is managing people and culture. So let's actually talk about that. Let's talk about implementation challenges. And I have a list here of the top 5, I would say, challenges that we've seen with our clients. And this is not exhaustive by any means, but these are the ones that come up time and time again when we're assisting clients with identifying the path forward with analytics. And I would say one of the top challenges is budget, which is kind of like a, yeah, okay, no kidding. That's always a challenge, right? Budget's always a challenge, I think, especially today. But, you know, it's a matter of making smarter decisions about the budget you are spending so you get that return, that value back. There's also an issue with skills. You know, a lot of organizations find that as they move up the curve, they don't necessarily have the skills in-house that they need to make that forward progression. So they need to address that as well. The third one is accessibility of data. This is highly consistent across the clients that we talk to when they're challenged by analytics. It's that they don't have access to clean, accurate, trusted data that is available when they need it to make timely decisions. So that's really a key piece as well. You know, anytime we talk about analytics, you can't do anything without data, right? That's the center of being data-driven. Adoption of new technology is often a barrier as well. So say that you get to a place where you've identified, you know, the right fit for analytics in your organization, and you've selected a technology tool, and then it just kind of falls flat. And I think there are a lot of reasons for that, and I think you're going to talk to me about that as well. You know, and I have some high-level thoughts I'll talk about in the next slide about how we can approach it. You're going to dig in more detail, but that's one of the biggest challenges, right, is that adoption piece.
Yeah, and we see the same things across the board here at Cause and Effect.
Yeah, absolutely. And then culture, obviously, you know, we're going to talk about as well. That's huge. Every organization has their own culture, and sometimes that can be an impediment to change. So we're going to talk about how you can combat that as well. So let's talk about, from our perspective, and we're more like the technology people, how do we actually tackle these challenges? So from a budget standpoint, when we're thinking about implementing analytics, there are some things you can do to help evaluate what might be worth the investment. So the first is to perform a business value assessment or some kind of ROI calculation or assessment. And I know sometimes this is hard, but even approximation is useful to understand, you know, it's not just a research project. What's a problem that we can address with analytics that might have some real return in terms of either increased revenue or decreased costs? And let's actually map that out to see if it's worth it to invest. The other piece that we've seen be really useful for our clients is prioritization. So it can be a little overwhelming sometimes to think about getting started with analytics because it can be really big. But if we come up with a series of implementation steps, and then we prioritize them, and then we hit each one, and we have a feedback system for accountability and measuring progress, then I think that's something that we can tie back to the budget, because we can say, hey, look, this is the priority. This is how we're going to measure it and hold folks accountable, so let's feel comfortable investing in that. So that's 2 ways that we can address budget. Skills gaps, some things that we can do to hit that point is identifying first the priority skills to acquire. So let's do a skills assessment or inventory for the organization to understand what your current skills are, and for the folks who might be able to be retrained or enabled to pick up some of these newer skills that are required. And then do we still have gaps where we might need to pull in outside assistance, whether that's hiring or consulting or what have you. So first we actually need to identify what's the priority in terms of the skill. So that's one way that we can tackle that challenge. The next one is accessibility. So of data. We hear all the time from clients that, you know, they're building a data warehouse, or we can't tackle this project until we have the data all ready. The reality is that if you wait to have your data all ready, you're never going to do anything, right? So it's better just to get started with what you do have, and then you can plan for future data collection or connectivity to other sources in the future, right? So start with what you have, plan for the future. It's a way to get started. We oftentimes talk about starting small. So this goes back to the prioritization, the budget, and we want to identify something that's doable. So let's start small, start with what you have, and then you can augment from there.
You know, Liz, when I think about this, I think about if I'm going to go make a recipe in my kitchen, I want to know what I have first so that I don't have to go out and get something. So when I hear you, talking about the accessibility of data and, even the adoption of new technologies, what do we currently have today, and are we using it? Do we have those data points? And to the point you specifically talked about, if we are missing something, that means that we can go try to find it. Do we have it? And we can ask the right questions,
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a key point, right? So I mentioned the skills gap. Part of that is, by extension, what are you asking people to use that's new, right? What's the technology? And that's kind of the next one, adoption of new technology. So let's assume that you need new technology to tackle some of these new analytics problems. So let's evaluate what you currently have, right? And see, do you really need something new? Is it just maybe using what you have differently or expanding the use of a current tool, or is it augmenting with something new? So yeah, it's definitely, we wouldn't advocate just going out and buying all new analytics technology just because. We definitely want to do some kind of inventory to understand what's currently available and then see if there's a technology gap in addition to that skills gap. So that's a great point. And if we do end up requiring some new technology, let's think about how we're rolling that out. And a lot of times we recommend doing a phased rollout instead of the big bang. Sometimes the big bang can be very overwhelming. So where I've seen the most success is where we roll out slowly, maybe by group or functional business unit area, or even just a small cadre across units. So we're testing things out so we can give feedback, not just on the technology, but on the training that's available. That's the second bullet point, enablement. Training is huge. You have to provide that for your team. If you just give technology to people and say, okay, go have at it, you're going to fail, right? So that's incredibly important. And then measuring outcomes. We want to make sure that we're seeing success. And we can't identify something successful if we haven't actually measured usage and outcomes, right? So again, getting feedback from the users on how it's going. A lot of these technologies, you can actually audit usage as well, so you can see where it's being used across the organization and see, do we need to do some retraining or additional enablement for a specific unit who may not be using it as much, or is there some other barrier? Maybe, again, the accessibility of data, right? These all kind of coincide and are related. Maybe one group needs something additional so they can be successful, but we need to measure the outcomes to really understand how the adoption is going. And then the final piece is culture, which again is hugely important. And I've seen this be a barrier in many organizations to the successful implementation of analytics, where there's a component of the culture that's very rigid, potentially, that doesn't enable flexibility and agility to embrace something new. So that's something that, Amy, I know you're going to hit on later, but just two kind of initial thoughts that we could do. We could conduct a change readiness assessment. So let's actually evaluate where we are. Are we ready for change? And depending on the results of that, let's come up with some kind of plan that we can adopt some methodology that helps us address change within the culture of the organization. And in some cases, we might need to change certain things about the culture so that we can be successful. All right. So I want to talk about one way to tackle some of these challenges and have a plan for how to tackle analytics. And our recommended approach here is to do an analytics strategy and roadmap. We want to do this so that we can come up with an actionable roadmap that hits on not just the kind of technical components we talked about, but also that change management piece as well. So let me talk through what that looks like. And the first thing that's really important here to think about is high-level process becoming data-driven. What are some of the key components that we need to consider? Looking at the top here, we needed a champion at the executive level or management level who really endorses the idea of analytics, using data at the center of making decision-making, and as importantly, who can communicate that to the rest of the organization, right? I've worked with many clients who get hung up because initiatives like this have not been communicated widely across the business. And so there's a lack of understanding about why we're doing it, what's important about it, that we are going to do it. So having that person at the top who's able to be the champion and the key communicator is really important. The next piece is to focus your analytics efforts. Right, so you want to channel your resources into the analytics that most directly serve the overarching strategy that's developed. You want to be highly focused so that you're not scattered and maybe hitting lots of little pieces, piecemeal. So let's stay focused. The next, and this is related, is to create a single analytics initiative. Have some common leadership with common technology and tools that you plan on across the organization so that everyone's in lockstep, so everyone, again, is communicated with, who understands what the plan is, so that you're on the same page. I think that's really important. Then we get into enabling access to the data, which, of course, we talked about as a major challenge. We need to make sure that whatever the strategy is always tied back to data. That data needs to be made accessible to the right people at the right time. And just as importantly is having the right analytics technology. So being very careful, one, in evaluating what you already have, but then considering how to augment that. What are the capabilities that you do need so that you can, again, meet that overarching strategy that's tied to the goals of the organization. Education, enablement, training is hugely important. We've already talked about this a little bit. If you're choosing a new piece of technology to implement, you absolutely should also plan on educating folks and enabling them on how to use it. And then finally, and probably most importantly, and establishing an analytics culture is super important here. You want to instill a company-wide respect for measuring, testing, and evaluating evidence and data. So that needs to become pervasive across the organization. So what does this actually look like from kind of a practical perspective? And what we recommend from a strategy and roadmap standpoint is to focus on these four components. So when we work with clients, we talk about doing an infrastructure alignment. So let's evaluate your system and see what do you need to support future analytics. So again, looking at future state and then looking at current state, then evaluating what the future state looks like and aligning the infrastructure to support that. The next is data readiness. So again, what data are available and so what's their quality? Let's evaluate that as well and come up with some recommendations on what may need to be done to support those future analytics with regard to the data. Insight-driven operations, this is really about best practices with regard to data and analytics, so making sure that whatever you're designing has insight in mind. So we want to be able to leverage analytics to gain insight that allows us to make decisions that impact the business positively. And then finally, transformation. As an organization becoming data-driven, maybe building out new applications or launching new business models that can revolutionize how you operate. So one level deeper for this, what this actually looks like from, again, our perspective, when we work with clients on developing an analytics strategy and roadmap, we start off with level setting where we ensure that everyone is using language the same way. When we talk about analytics, it means different things to different people. So we want to make sure that that we're all on the same page. So we do a level set for all the stakeholders. And we also talk a lot about use cases, maybe from your specific industry, that are relevant to kind of prime the pump and think ahead about where analytics could be leveraged in your organization or for your role. The next piece is doing some visioning. So we think about what's possible, right? So it's kind of blue sky. If you could have anything, what would you want to make your role easier, more efficient, help you transform things that need to be transformed? And we usually dedicate a good chunk of time to working with folks to actually articulate this and map this out and to prioritize it. Because again, if you think back to some of those challenges, we need to have a prioritized plan in place. It's great to come up with all of the art of the possible scenarios, but we actually have to get started somewhere. So we walk through a prioritization process so that we can actually come up with an actionable plan.
Yeah, Liz, what I love about this is so many clients will think about what they have, what they've had in the past, what they're used to, and what I love that you guys do over at LPA is it's a visioning workshop. If you had a blank slate, what could you do? And that removes so many barriers. Instead of just saying, what do we have? How can we make it better? You guys really kind of remove the fear of saying, like, let's start from scratch. What could we do? And then let's figure out how to get there. So, yeah, I think that's great.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. Folks do get kind of stuck sometimes on the way things have always been done. And so we're giving them permission to think outside the box and really tell us, you know, whatever you need, let us know, and we'll take that into consideration. So it's a safe space to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then adjacent to that, we're going to assess the data, right? So once you come up with that prioritized list of use cases, we're going to interrogate the data that's required to address those. And that might actually be part of our prioritization. You know, if we have a really great use case, but the data isn't there for us, maybe we move it down the list. So let's see what data you do have. Let's look at the technology again, to Amy's point previously. Let's evaluate the technology that you have, identify any gaps, and then we'll make sure that you have an infrastructure that's ready to support your target analytics in the future. The final step is to actually pull that all together, all this good information that we gather, and develop the roadmap. So this combines the business requirements, the data assessment results, the prioritization to come up with an overall roadmap for the organization. And then we recommend a strategy for how to actually implement that, including a project plan. But, you know, the one thing that I haven't addressed yet, and Amy, this is where I'm going to hand it off to you, is, you know, once we have this strategy and roadmap all planned out, how do we consider the change management piece, right? Because this can be a really big endeavor and it can be kind of scary. Change is scary, right?
Yeah.
So how do we tee people up and support them so that they can be successful when they're actually implementing this?
Yeah, absolutely, Liz. And I'm so glad that you invited me to talk about this. I could talk about managing change for days. But what I want to say is this all stemmed from me working in supply chain consulting and making amazing recommendations and coming back 6 months, a year later to document and nothing changed. And I'm pretty frustrated with understanding, you know, why aren't people changing? And so I pursued a little bit more in education and found myself really diving into the adoption world. So today, first I'm going to start with why address change. So, you know, why address change? To me, Kent Duck says it the best. The business changes, technology changes, the team changes, the team members change. The problem isn't change per se, because change is going to happen. The problem rather is the inability to cope with change when it comes. So today, my job isn't to convince you that change is happening every day within your own life and at work. We all know that. What we want to talk about today is how we proactively look at change to drive more effective, efficient, and happy teams. The why isn't just an assumption, right? You know, I can say all day long change is happening. We're gonna take that as an assumption, but let's look at the numbers. So the BI industry alone is projecting growth of $22.8 billion by 2021. That's an 8.4 year-over-year growth. Now, that's a healthy, consistent rate of growth. The users of data, the power of data, will continue to drive organization strategies and revenues. Again, 50% software growth alone continues to grow. It's such an expedient rate with such a large amount of investment from organizations. You know, Liz talked about ROI and budget being such a huge concern. What's alarming to me is not the price that organizations are paying for what data can provide back. That ROI is rock solid for most organizations. But that current adoption rates for these investments are looming around 30%. That's almost $16 billion in wasted investment dollars. So how do we change that? Liz talked a lot about process and technology, right? The problem of increasing adoption is a multidimensional one with no quick fix. That's why a lot of people choose not to look at it. They say, if I build a great process and I'm going to add this new technology, then everybody's just going to want to use it. But that's not the case. Ideally, there needs to be a balance and alignment of the people, process, and technological factors for business intelligence adoption to succeed. Galvanizing all three of these core areas needs to be a central business focus that everyone can identify with and take an active part in accomplishing. This is where the majority of business intelligence adoption strategies fail. There's often no underlying business purpose that benefits everyone. It's just not how the world works. But when every employee using the system has a strong sense of ownership and purpose, directly relating back to the organizational goals, all the strategic areas needed for the improvement of adoption can fit into place, increasing adoption rates. Now, Liz also spoke to this. A senior management champion alone can't galvanize the purpose of a BI system as powerfully as a shared goal and a desire on the part of the employee to excel with the process and technology changes. Often, we address the technology changes and sometimes the process changes. But how often in your organization has change been rolled out that you feel is people-centered? How does an organization roll out change that sticks? They have to make it personal and relevant to all the individuals impacted by that change. So how do we drive relevance?
Amy, if I can just pause for a minute there. What really strikes me, when you're talking about the people component is the ownership and tying everything back to the organizational goals. I think that's one of the areas two areas that I'm not seeing a lot of the time here, right? So making sure that people are owning, right, not just the leadership, but everyone who's involved has to feel some kind of ownership, and then tying everything back to some kind of organizational goals so that's relevant, right? You don't just want to do things in a vacuum when you're talking about analytics implementation. You want to tie that back to goals that are going to impact the whole business, right?
Yep, absolutely, because even if a change that I make saves 3 seconds, or it may only save me 3 seconds, which doesn't feel like much for the small change I'm making, but could impact somebody down that process chain by hours. And so we have to trust that our organization is making the right decisions for us, and that's where it goes to your point of having that sponsorship from the top down and to give the why behind that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, so productivity, what we have seen increases by 56%. 56%. Productivity is increasing when managers are involved in helping their direct reports align their goals with the needs of the organization. Every organization has a goal of revenue or keeping costs down. Every single individual impacts that, whether it be your travel schedule, how many clients you're working with, the efficiency of how you work. Every single individual goal ties to an organizational goal. Now, despite this, only 44% of employees feel like they can connect their individual goals to those of the organization. I can honestly say I've been in that position before. This means that sometimes there's an alarming disconnect. So if we're trying to roll out a new change or a new technology and I can't see how the change I'm making is relevant at all to impact the company in a positive way, why would I do it? So remember that humans are self-centered by nature. Unfortunately, it's the way we are. And we seek approval and validation to reinforce all behaviors and actions. So when we have goals, we know that our behaviors and actions aren't in line with that. Beyond feeling meaningful, goals should also have a direct impact on employees' performance and reward structure. Individual goals derive directly from the company or organizational goals. So let's take a look at cause and effect. These aren't actually our team. I don't think you want to see our team on that screen. Kidding. But I want to talk about the fact that when we're talking about teams, people say it is impossible to do this. There's so much diversity. When we look at the screen, we see different races, different genders, different ages, different generations. Maybe they live in different geographies. They all have varying goals. There are different points in their career. They have different desires, ambitions. There's so many variables. But just like any experiment, we have to find the consistent constant throughout that, which is the organizational impact. So let's talk about why organizations fail. Every single one of these unique individuals is going to go through change in their own way, but they're going to be going through the same process. Now, the fact is, all organizations experience a productivity dip as they adapt to new circumstances. This can be any kind of change, from travel changes to technology changes to organizational staffing changes. So we refer to this as the valley of despair. The productivity dip coincides with the time it takes employees to adjust to the changes in process and roles. In the past, the prevailing wisdom was to simply weather the storm and hope for the best. So a leader told you to do something and you just do it. And maybe it's really hard for a bit of time, but then it gets easier. What we found is organizational change management has proven that adequate communication, which is planned, education, which Liz spoke to, and training can help companies minimize the duration and depth of that productivity dip associated with change. Again, recognizing the benefits of your investment. This way, a company can realize the projected benefits of a change far faster and keep employee morale from plummeting and avoid the potential of costly turnover. So, investing a certain amount of money upfront to help prepare employees for large-scale impacts to their jobs can save a lot more money down the road. Now, concentrating on technology-related success factors sets the foundation for enabling greater process and organizational change. Key success factors from a process standpoint include clearly defining the business problem and processes, like Liz spoke to, and gaining consensus on what the problems the system or program need to solve. Second, processes need to be defined by user expectations, using an audit or baseline of their current needs. To Liz's example, the visioning experience. Third, there needs to be process workflows that allow for the application and components to align with the user-specific needs or organization. Again, making it individual. Here are the exact steps that are going to be changed within your daily workflow. The goal for change is to provide a clear, well-defined business case that gives every participating employee a chance to see how their contributions drive success for the organization as a whole. Providing the opportunity for greater autonomy, mastery, and purpose for every employee is the cornerstone to making adoption rates improve. The greatest implementations aren't pushed to high adoption levels. Employees drive them. Let's take a look at what every employee goes through when we go through change. No one can deny going through these, whether it be a personal change or professional change. So let's break it down. Now, as I said on that screen, we had a lot of different diversities and ages and generations and races. Everybody experiences the change process, but at different times. This is where a change readiness assessment or cultural analysis can be beneficial for organizations. The job of the organization and leadership is to know where their people are throughout the change journey so they can appropriately coach each individual based on their needs. Again, these steps are not different from if you take away your son's Xbox to if you change the ERP system that you're working with at work. The initial response is shock, then typically denial. This isn't happening to me. I'm going to be able to keep using the old system. Then frustration because you're going into this valley of despair. Things are different. This isn't comfortable. I don't like this yet. I'm not used to it. And then it begins to impact you. You become slightly depressed. Okay, well, this is what it's going to be. I guess I'm just going to do it. Then you begin to experiment. This isn't so bad. I have the training. I see how this makes my life easier. You make the decision to make that a part of your daily workflow, and eventually you integrate it. Now, we've all seen people move quickly through this, and we've all seen people move slowly through this, and we can get stuck in steps. But as leadership, identifying where people are allows us to be able to coach them through that. And again, by sharing this information of, I know you guys are all going to go through this, you can't deny it to me, as your boss, it's going to help me the best to understand where you are, also brings up open communication to be used in one-on-one when enabling and coaching through change and doing different implementations.
Yeah, I think, one of the things here is acknowledgement, right? This whole kind of curve or process to have leadership and management acknowledge it, people will feel heard and understood, right? So that can help as we're actually moving through each step and hopefully support people as they get to the integration piece.
Right. What I find typically diffuses a lot of the negative comments that come through change that you hear when people are frustrated is by letting them know this is exactly where you are. This is normal. Yeah. Welcome to being human. So when people know they're going to go through these steps, it's just much more relatable, and it tends to just expedite the process. But I would challenge every organization on the phone today to say, how many of you have seen this? How many of you know this is what you go through when you've done a change before? Okay. So the strategy for adoption, what do we do? And Liz already did a great job of touching on the importance of focusing your efforts. Companies, individuals, and teams need a target to know what they're shooting at. That target is the goal in the focused effort or project. If everything was going well, there would be no need to change, right? A change occurs when something needs to be improved or when something isn't working. There's a sense of urgency for this opportunity. What is that? Are we going to be able to save more money, become more efficient? As an organization, creating and defining the sense of urgency for why the change is needed begins the process of relating individuals to the project and the purpose of the project. From there, we look for individuals to form a guiding coalition. We don't want everybody. We don't want the entire company. Like Liz said, it's how you eat an elephant, one bite at a time. We want individuals that are respected, are interactive, are engaged. Or you can also bring individuals or two of those individuals onto the team that typically resist change to help increase their participation and provide them purpose throughout the process. This coalition needs to be a diverse set of individuals with varying impacts of the opportunity. From there, the coalition, which comes from varying departments and skill sets, creates a vision for the opportunity. An example could be to create integrated and streamlined data flow that will provide access to relevant information that guides proactive engagement and communication. Something as simple as that. This vision, and the sense of urgency need to be communicated, as Liz pointed out again, from the highest level of leadership to endorse and launch the project, and to inform the individuals what to expect and what is needed from them to take this vision and turn it into reality. Again, it has to come from the highest level of the organization possible because it's relaying the importance of why we're doing this. From there, the team addresses the different initiatives and who they impact so they can best communicate the relevance when we move into the next step, which is to enlist a volunteer army. This is when we expand from a small set of individuals to a larger group, perhaps a department, a team, an org. The guiding coalition is then responsible, along with leadership, to enable employees by removing barriers. Having a central repository of implementation concerns is a great way to centralize individuals that have a voice throughout the process and feel they are heard. We would never be able to keep pushing at work without little wins. When a milestone is reached, when a certain adoption number is hit, or when a new piece of software is launched, celebrate the win and acknowledge all of those who have participated. These wins should be communicated from the highest level of the organization to demonstrate the importance of these changes and the progress. The wins help sustain acceleration. I think we've all been through changes, whether it's you're changing your personal diet and 2 weeks in, all of a sudden you find it's no longer important. When we celebrate little wins along the way, we've all started projects and lost steam, right? The coalition and leadership must continue to communicate and inform on progress and wins of the opportunity to ensure individuals are remaining committed to making those changes into the project. Lastly, we institute the change. The change is now not a change, but a new norm. Congratulate the team, celebrate, and on to the next. By repeating this process within the organization or changes, small or large, employees begin to automatically shift their thinking, and that is how you build a culture of change.
This is great, Amy. I think it's a way to really break down how to manage change in a way that's accessible. Because, again, change is scary and hard, and I think folks sometimes stumble because they don't have a plan in place for adoption. So having this broken down into really kind of discrete components, I think will help our clients to be ready to tackle this change.
Right. And, Liz, what we're talking about is just creating another process that can become a standard practice within an organization. And before long, the behavior is so commonplace that the culture is shifted and everybody's on board.
Sure. Yeah. It's like I said, it's just part of the new norm, right?
Yep. I love it.
Yeah. Awesome. Cool. So you might be thinking to yourself, all right, this all sounds great, but how do I get started? So, of course, we would like to help you get started, and there are several ways that we can help you out. We can support you on an analytics strategy and roadmap. We can assist you with a change readiness assessment. We can also meet with you to discuss internal change methodology, whether that's at the corporate and or project level. And, of course, we're always there for you to support any analytics implementations. Our websites are both on the screen here. Please feel free to visit them, to contact us. We'd love to have a conversation with you. And with that, I want to open up for some questions. So, looks like we have a few. So the first one, what types of people participate in a change readiness assessment? So Amy, would you mind tackling that one?
Yeah, so, we've seen them in varying forms. Traditionally, a change ready assessment is in two forms. If it's an extremely large organization, we typically look at a specific project, and we'll look at anything from the VP on down, so how is communication done. If it's at an organizational level, we start at the C-suite and we work our way down to really assess how is communication, what is the perception versus what is the reality, and what are some of the changes we need to make. So the answer is very vague, but it could be everybody. It could be a small subgroup. Some organizations struggle in some departments versus others, or perhaps they want to take a sampling from across the organization. What we like to do is sit down with a client and discuss their current state and then build a plan to move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I can tailor that to any of the individual clients on the call.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so let's take another one. What kinds of gains can I expect from implementing a data-driven strategy, and what have you seen be impactful?
Yeah, I've been in the consulting role now about 21 years, and I can say the work that I've done year over year in the past through some very large organizations is we see roughly about a 35% increase when adoption is focused on in regards to return on investment. Those were documented numbers from my previous organization. The funny thing is, Liz, the amount of time spent on the front end to receive that ROI was minimal.
Wow.
And yeah, once you begin this practice, it becomes, again, second nature. So with that initial investment, we continue to see organizations just grow and grow because, again, changes throughout the organization, not just with technology.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love to hear that quantitative number, because that's a pretty significant ROI, and to your point, for kind of minimal investment up front, because I'm assuming there were plans in place, right, for how to be successful in managing not just technological components, but the change components. And so I think that the message here is that it's doable, right? It's totally doable. I think folks don't have to be scared or feel like it's going to be this huge thing or a huge investment necessarily. It sounds like you can get some really significant returns, if you just actually plan to take the next step.
Yeah, it's really just a simple shift in mindset. It doesn't sound simple, but it believably is. And what I would say, just like any other project, you touched on this earlier, is skill set. Some organizations are ready and prepared and have the ownership in-house, and some need to lean on us throughout the accountability process because they don't necessarily have the ownership to give the man hours to implementing change. So that's where it goes to skill set. Sometimes using a consultant throughout the process makes sense. Sometimes building out the methodology and you have an incredible ownership in-house and you can take that and roll with it. So again, depending on skill set is really defines how we customize that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, one more question. How long does it take to build a roadmap and then implement the proposed changes? So again, it really depends. Each organization is different. It depends on requirements if we're going to create a roadmap for the entire organization or one or two or three functional business units. It's not necessarily a 6-month endeavor or a 3-month endeavor. It's usually a matter of weeks. We find that we can come in and have, a significant impact and assist your team and come up with some kind of strategy to move forward. So again, we'd be happy to walk through with you for your individual company what that would look like.
Yeah, and what I want to say, and I've seen LPA do this multiple times, is also a small optimization project.
Yeah.
A lot of people think these need to be huge, massive projects you look at. Liz, I know you guys work day in and day in and day out with customers to really optimize what you're implementing. Sometimes just going back and looking at a project maybe you did 3-4 years ago and figure out if there's a better way to tighten that up. That's another good area to look at, which is a smaller bite than perhaps looking at a larger project.
Yeah, absolutely. Small steps, revisiting prior initiatives to tune, to retool. Absolutely, you can get some quick wins that way, for sure.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, any other questions, we can follow up with you. And with that, I want to thank everyone for participating. Amy, thank you so much for joining us today. Really enjoyed having you participate. And yeah, I look forward to following up with everybody.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Liz. It's been an absolute pleasure.